Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 64 of SAMA, a webinar series where we invite an expert to talk about their area of expertise. This week, we are delighted to have Dr. Zach Bush to talk about the importance of emotion in gut health. Zach has the distinction of being one of the few triple board certified physicians in the country with expertise in internal medicine, endocrinology and metabolism, and hospice palliative care. The breakthrough science that Dr. Bush and his colleagues have delivered offer profound new insights into human health and longevity. His education efforts provide a grassroots foundation for everyday people like you and me, and are a catalyst for legislative decisions. Zach's goal is to make a paradigm change in the mega industries of big farming, big pharmac, and Western medicine at large. In this episode, Dr. Zach Bush will share how emotions such as fear can lead to disease, the role these emotions have on health issues such as leaky gut, and how to recover from diseases. So, welcome to our show, Zach.
Thank you so much for having me on. Very, very pleased to be with you and your audience here.
Tell me, how can emotions lead to disease?
Excellent. Yeah, so this is one of the phenomenal pieces of science that is really missing from the typical allopathic model. The understanding of the role of emotions in human life is one that is shied away from by the hard sciences. And yet, it's obviously a part of everyday life for every human being. And interestingly, we see it, relatively missing from the animal kingdom. We don't see emotions causing disease in the animal kingdom. I think there probably are emotions that occur on a level with animals. We certainly see that in our companion animals and the like. We can certainly look to elephants and some of the other mammals like the monkeys and everything else to show of emotional interactions between different individuals within a species like that. But the human seems to have a very distinct capacity for taking emotion to a pathological level where it becomes a process of disease and pathology. And that's a remarkable thing about our species and about this, perhaps the spiritual position we hold on this planet, is we have a level of freedom and maybe perhaps even free will, if you will, if you're thinking on the spiritual level, that allows us to both rise to great heights and crash to great lows. And in the sciences, it's been a long time coming for us to start to wrap our minds around how it's possible that an emotion could be at the root of a disease process. We can certainly look back to the mid 1800s when we started to recognize that mood disorders and the abnormal emotions that would come with them were a disease. And so Freud and all of his colleagues in Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s really started to categorize the mood disorders. And so I think that was the first maybe stepping stone, because previous to that, when people had psychosis or depression or all these things, it was chalked up to spiritual rather than physical or other biologic processes. And so people were thought to be possessed, or they were thought to have spiritual attack from demons, or otherwise was usually the description that would be in the literature if somebody was psychotic. And so Freud and his colleagues really moved us forward, and Carl Jung with a lot of philosophical reflection on what our paradigm is, what is our sense of reality, and what forms that sense of reality. All of these things were first steps towards helping us to understand that there was likely a scientific and medical underpinning to emotions, which then allowed us to start to imagine the possibility that emotions could also be a part of accelerating damage. In the end of the century, by the end of the century of the 20th century, there we start to see a lot of information coming around the biophysics. And so an increasing amount of understanding that we are not cellular and molecular beings, we're actually atomic beings. We have atoms that lace together each molecule, and those molecules then go on to form something like a complex cell which would then go on to create 70 trillion cells together, a human body. So the complexity of the fabric is pretty extraordinary. The scale is fascinating. The atom is so tiny compared to a human cell that it really defies the ability of the human brain to wrap around it. And yet this atom is the fabric from which we're knit together. And the fascinating thing about those atoms is that they're not even physical beings or entities, perhaps. They are 99.999% vacuum space and 0.001% solid. And so that's a really phenomenally confusing, reality, that everything around us, the table that I sit in front of, the computer screen that we look at, all of these things are vastly vacuum space. And there's almost no physical solidity to anything, including within our bodies. And so this impression that we have of solidness is really nothing more than that, a perception. It's a belief system around the visual experience that we have, the tactile experience that we have, and we attribute those kind of perceptions to this belief of solidity or solid matrix. And so once again, if we dive down there into that atomic vacuum space, we find out that it's not actually empty. It is a vacuum, meaning there's no air there. There's no, there's no atmosphere within that space. It's empty on the physical plane. It's actually full of electromagnetic field, and that electromagnetic field is pretty, fascinating new world that we've been diving into. With looks into it in the 1950s, 60s. With the understanding that frequency resonance of different physical structures and things like this. The Carillion photography came out in the 1950s and 60s with the ability to image the aura or the energy field around a leaf or a crystal or a human being. And so the ability to image that energy field started to give us a little bit of a glimpse into the reality that we are much more than we would appear, and that we can also have disruptions of that energy field. And the disruptions come in the form of perturbations within that electromagnetic field that fills the vacuum space. That electromagnetic field is a coherent message, if you will. It's coherent mathematical data that comes out in geometric and frequency resonance to dictate the behavior of the 0.001% that might be solid, which would be the protons, the electrons, and anything that would be built from them. So the atoms would go on to coalesce to make all the elements in the periodic chart, and the periodic chart would coalesce to start to build complex structures and molecular structures, and those molecules would then go on to build the rest. And so this kind of building block type phenomenon, we start to recognize, boy, if we perturb or create dissidence in the fabric, we're going to screw up the structure of everything upstream of that. And that's where we get into this reality of emotions being part of this. We are now starting to realize that stress at that electromagnetic field level can come in a myriad of fashions. You can certainly have physical stress, you can have emotional stress, you can have chemical stress, all these different things that will change that electromagnetic field. And as we've gotten higher and higher quality cameras to image the electromagnetic field in different ways, we're starting to realize that it really is the underpinning to the whole 4,000, 5,000 years of Chinese medicine. When a Chinese medicine doctor does a good pulse reading, they'll tell you which of your meridian or electrical systems are perturbed and weakened. And that was, seemed woo-woo to me as an allopathic doctor. It seemed ridiculous that, somebody could do a check, put their fingers on my pulse and tell me what year I probably had an appendectomy and what year I had an emotional trauma from a spouse or close loved one. These seemed ridiculous, and yet these things play out when you see a really good energy therapist or acupuncturist. And then once we got the camera in our clinic, by 2012, we had a camera from Russia built by Konstantin Karakov and his team there, kind of a fourth generation device for looking at the electromagnetic field indirectly. We're now able to get that down to a resolution where we can tell you, just like the Chinese medicine doc, it is this pathway right here, this meridian, the kidney meridian or the spleen meridian, that has the stress in it. And so that was my big kind of aha moment in 2012 of, oh my gosh, we can image this thing. It's real. It's not theoretical. And we've been able to watch over the last 6 years pathologies and interventions change that electromagnetic field static or dissonance and put a more coherent field or electromagnetic resonance in those spaces that had previously been depleted or disorganized or chaotic. You bring order there, and then you get to see the macro consequences of healing in the individual, whether that's spiritual, physical, or emotional healing.
Quite often you hear, before I ask the question, is this the one that uses your finger? You put it onto a plate and it...
Yeah, so you have an electrically charged plate or camera lens that pulses 10,000 volts across its surface at a very low current, so you don't actually get electrocuted. And in that electrical charge, though, it's a high enough voltage that it actually discharges plasma, and so the gas potential around your fingertip explodes under that high voltage. And you take a half-second video of that explosion, and then you can compile that. The computer compiles that into a static image, and the organization of that gas discharge is what we can look at, the either relative order or disorder. And then we can overlap that with a reflexology map that a brilliant chiropractor in the U.S. worked out over his entire career. He overlaps that with Dr. Constantine's work, and suddenly you have a clinical tool that's relatively useful. And so that's how we go about, utilizing that tool.
So quite literally, the power's in your fingertips.
Yes, and you've experienced that. You've touched somebody's hand, or you've even brushed by somebody, and you'll get a tingle, or you'll get an experience, or you'll get goosebumps, or it's all of these things are in our daily experiences, and we tend to brush them off and ignore them and everything else. But the reality is, you're a very, very sensitive electromagnetic tool, assay or science kit that's able to detect the energies around you. And it's interesting that we train our children out of that so early, right? It's not unusual for a kid to be repelled from an individual, and then you hear their parents saying, no, you have to accept that person. Go hug your aunt because it's your aunt. Go hug that person. That kid is sensing, wow, there's a negative energy field here. And the kid's not thinking, I want to reject my aunt. It's just sensing a recoil from a chaotic energy field. And yet we train the kid to ignore that, and we say, no, you need to love that. You need to, put yourself next to that. And then we, all reach adulthood to find out that we're in a bunch of codependent relationships, because we've literally been trained into them to bring ourselves alongside other chaotic energy fields, to mirror them, to carry that stress, to mimic that pattern of disorder.
Okay, the question I was going to ask before was, quite often when someone's combating a serious disease, they may come to a point where they basically give up. And that's like an emotional decision that they've made. They're not going to fight it anymore. And from there, their health can quite often decline quite radically. Is this a similar thing you're talking about?
I think it's almost that's the silver lining on the back side of it. So on the front side, you have negative emotion that can really drive chaos in the energy field, and those tend to be anxiety, major depression as disease processes, but as emotions, they tend to be fear and guilt. And so fear and guilt are certainly the predominant negative emotions that I see affect human biology. They certainly both are present in every single cancer that I see. Really? And they tend to vary quite a bit in their severity and in their expression depending on the cancer. So prostate cancer tends to be a guilt paradigm more than a fear paradigm, whereas anger as a dominant emotion tends to be kind of a repressed symptom in pancreatic cancer. And these symptoms or these emotions can either be obvious in the individual, or they cannot even be from the individual's life. They could be patterns of anger that were in their genomics, in the fetal state from mom and dad, or patterns that could date back generations. We now know that emotional stress of a child in the womb probably reflects at least 3, if not 15 generations before it. And so each generation can create an electromagnetic field dissidence and pass that on to their offspring. And that dissidence or chaos can actually survive multiple generations and continue to pass down this emotional chaos. And so when you successfully in your life break through something, and you might do this through psychotherapy, you might do it through in emotional therapy, that's
Tapping.
something that or any of these, body talk, tapping. When you make a breakthrough and you become a new person because you've relieved yourself of some deep guilt or fear or a belief system around these emotions, and you make that breakthrough, you just erased a pattern that may have been, generations in the making, and you've broken that pattern for all the generations to come. So it really speaks to the importance of self-care. When you do excellent self-care and you work yourself through the layers that you need to work through and have the opportunity to break these patterns, you're doing it for generations behind and forward, and you're really changing humanity with a single individual making this step, because the ripple effects are too complex and too far-reaching for our current science and scientists to even really wrap our minds around. So take heart in that. When you go and see a massage therapist and take care of yourself, when you go and hit the beach for a week to just do some self-time and meditation, changing humanity in these things. This is literally changing the fabric of the reality that we are knit together from, and it's compelling. And I've seen it over and over again be the foundation for deep healing in individuals. And keep in mind, healing isn't the opposite of dying of cancer. People heal all the time and then go on to transition to the other side through their cancer or whatever disease process. And I've seen very successful healing journeys end with, cancer death. And it's a jump, it's a paradigm shift as practitioners and as patients and consumers and family members to start to embrace a new concept of death and dying, a new concept of failure and success, a new concept of health and healing that is, of course, going to include a death. It's the one thing that we're running 100% likelihood of is of death here. And perhaps there's Christ and one other gentleman in scripture that's talked to that maybe didn't die, was caught up in the clouds beforehand. But in the end, we're running a very, very high likelihood of death. And we shouldn't preclude the definition of health and healing by the presence of death in our lives. It's a natural recycling and upcycling, hopefully, of energy and life itself and the souls that live within us. And so that's, some underpinnings of the stress side of it. Now, you mentioned this transition to a moment when somebody says, you know what, I'm done with this biological fight. I'm going to let go of this body and I'm going to jump. I have seen that over and over again in my hospice work, and the amount of healing that happens in those few minutes, often that, it's not unusual if somebody finally makes that release and then they have some clarity. They suddenly, have the most clear mental state they've had in years or in months, and they're speaking to their family, and they pass on some beautiful pearls of love and care and forgiveness. And then they pass away, often within minutes or hours of that moment of clarity. Sometimes we get a few weeks with people in that state of release, sometimes a few months. But the beauty that comes in somebody letting go of the fight for life and just accepting life and its recycling and disappearance, or its reappearance somewhere else, however it works. And that process is so beautiful to witness. It's definitely my most rewarding and favorite part of hospice work, is being witness to a human being making this transition from the belief that they have to hold on to life versus accept life, the gift of life. And I'm trying to do that in my own life to increase my longevity and life expectancy by reducing my own stress, with the realization that I don't need to fight for my own life each day. My biology, my thrive is not something I should cling to. It's something I should joyfully accept and recognize its miracle each day. If I wake up with life and breath within me, that's miraculous. It's something given to me. It's something that is flowing from the greater universe into my body today. There must be purpose and must be important impact that I can have on humanity and the world at large if, again, I wake up tomorrow and have breath in my body. And so it's a beautiful process. It's one that I'm excited to continue to see in humanity as we continue to mature together, of what does life look like if we stop clinging to it and start celebrating it as the gift that it is.
Well, you've given us a lot to contemplate there. When you're talking about hereditary diseases, which is really what you can actually break that through the emotion. It's a state which is carried from your parents because you haven't chosen your parents carefully enough, obviously. And you break that chain through emotional means by accepting and basically breaking the chain, if you like.
Yeah.
By overcoming the emotional state.
Breaking is so important and so powerful, and it ripples through families quickly. The living within your family will change when you finally forgive yourself for whatever you feel guilty for, and give yourself that 100% permission slip to just be you, and that anything that's happened, anything you've done, was a result of a complex, collection of, familial, personal, environmental stimuli that shaped your decisions and mistakes in the past. And you start to realize, that wasn't my fault. It was a natural outpouring of the environment that I was in at the time. Accept that, come to terms from it, learn from it, certainly, and then forgive yourself thoroughly. And once you do that, the ripple effects are immediate. And you see movies about this. You certainly had some version of this, either tiny or dramatic, in your own life, where a forgiveness or a resolution of fear and guilt occurs, and suddenly the whole family dynamic shifts. Relationships that have been estranged suddenly become super close. You see these stories over and over and over again. So it's a beautiful opportunity we have to heal as not just an individual, but as a larger family and community and world at large.
A question's come in from Dre Callender. The question is, have there been any papers on people to see cellular damage or changes at the cell membrane or internally at the mitochondria or the atom of the cell when fear or guilt is induced? I guess what they're saying is, have they done studies on a person and applied guilt? You should be working rather than sitting here doing our study. And have they seen any ill changes in their body? Have any serious studies been done with the role that
I'm not quite in the question there, but it sounds like the question is, have studies been done to show proactively the emotional trauma on an individual? Is that basically the...
Yes, I think that's, what Dre is asking. Yes.
I haven't read. I'm sure those studies have been done in some shape or form. Our group is never blessed to be present right at the moment of an emotional trauma, typically. But what we do get to see is the opposite, which is a moment of healing. And we've captured this dramatically on energy field camera in a number of cases. The most dramatic one was a 29-year-old woman who had a brain tumor, and it was a metastasis from a very aggressive cancer in her abdomen called a neuroendocrine carcinoma. And she had, before she passed away from her brain tumor about a year and a half earlier, she'd gone into total remission, body totally clear of tumors. And that moment of remission happened in about, probably a split second, but we were able to image her before and after this healing event, 45-minute period. So she had a baseline. We could see the areas of chaos around the tumors. She had 3 large tumors in her abdomen. 45 minutes later, you can see on GDV imaging complete clearance of all of that dissidence. Within days of that, we had a repeat ultrasound that showed no tumors left. And so, something dramatic changed in those 45-minute period in the energy field, which had an immediate impact on the biologic presence of these tumors. And so that was a radical example of the opposite of, there was a trauma that happened at some point in that woman's life that set her up for this horrible abdominal cancer and this vulnerability around her ovaries and uterus where the metastases had formed. And then suddenly she changed that playing field. She dramatically changed the terrain of the biophysics, and the tumors disappeared simply because they can't exist in a space of really coherent, organized, well-attuned, good information stream frequency resonance. And so you have to have chaos. You have to have enough disconnect from your own core self for a cancer cell to be confused enough and isolated enough to form a cancer cell and remain a cancer cell. And so apoptosis or programmed self-suicide must have happened very quickly in that woman's cancers, because there was no signs of inflammation, there was no fluid, there was no anything a few days later that would have suggested that the immune system came and attacked those spaces to leave scar and everything else. There was literally no trace of the tumors left. We have another guy who had metastatic prostate cancer through all of his bones, to his brain, to his lungs. He had mets everywhere. And within 3 months, he had no tumors anywhere. That journey, was probably instantaneous, though it looked like it was 3 months for us to kind of document that journey, because we don't do scans every day. But sometime in that 3-month interval, there was an instantaneous change, because again, on imaging at the 3-month mark, there was not a scar, there was not a hole in the bone where the tumors had been. It was 100% looked like a different human being's scans. You couldn't believe that the two were the same. We've showed these images to radiologists and other doctors, and it's just jaws on the ground, because you just can't comprehend that healing can happen in this fashion, where it's so complete. It's much more a reversal of the time frame. It's going back in time in that human's body to a precancerous state rather than a slow healing process. And the atomic physics is weird. We're starting to realize, because quantum physics is real, because the space-time continuum is not linear, that real healing events like this, when they occur, really are the proton going back in time and literally returning the fabric of the individual back to this pre-disease state. It's not, the biology of slow healing and scar formation and everything else that we learn as the healing process. So there seems to be the ability for biologic healing, and there's this extraordinary capacity for biophysics and healing, which is time travel at the physics level.
Wow. That woman that you're talking about, her cancer returned. Why did it return?
That's a great question. And, I've seen this happen so many times, where you have a breast cancer patient who's in complete remission for 15 years, and then suddenly her cancer comes back and kills her in 6 months. Same thing for this woman. She went into complete remission. And when she recurred, none of the tumors that had been there before were what recurred. Her abdomen stayed completely clear, which is where the tumor had formed and where all of her original metastases were. But the history of this woman is fascinating, in that her main struggle in life, her kind of north node, if you will, or the journey she was born into, was the struggle with the reality of God. And this struggle for kind of the man-God question affects one energy center in particular in the human body, and that energy center is the 6th chakra in Chinese medicine, and there's other terms for the chakras, but it's right in the center of the head, and that functions in the physics field as kind of a vortex. Each of these how should I describe them here? Each of these energy centers that would be a chakra, or any of these descriptions in language, function much like you see a quasar or a black hole. Any of these structures in astrophysics out in space create these huge energy fields that affect gas and particles around them. And that's why we get these beautiful pictures of galaxies and their spinning arms, or the supernovas and their incredible gas formations that can look like an eyeball, or all these different cool things that you see in Time magazine or Life, or Hubble space images, all this stuff. That's all speaking to the fabric of the vacuum space. And we have those centers, 7 of them, within the human body. The first one at the base of the pelvis, the 7th one kind of right at the top of the crown of our head. The 6th one is right here in this space, and it's also been called the God and Man chakra. And this woman literally was journaling day in and day out, even during the 1.5 years of her total remission, around her struggle with her parents' religion, which is kind of a very conservative Christian worldview. And she was very much kind of, bitter towards that, angry towards God, that she had never found a life partner, that she wasn't pregnant yet, that she didn't have children, that she had this whole list of complaints that all of us tend to be able to do by midlife. We can list out our complaints to God. Her complaints were not just to God, it was around the complaint that I don't even believe God exists. I don't believe it's a greater thing. And I've seen people who don't believe there is anything, and it doesn't cause any stress in their lives. But for this woman, this was major stress. Like, she struggled day in and day out with this question of, is there a God? Is there not a God? And so this created this dissonance, this huge chaotic weakness in her brain. And we could see that weakness, dating back to the very first images we had gotten on her, a couple years before she went into remission. And so you could see that vulnerability over time, and it didn't improve. That vulnerability remained. It remained there even when she had this incredible, extraordinary healing event where you could see all of the tumors disappear in her abdomen. Still, there was this vulnerability up in the brain at that point due to this dissonance in the sixth chakra. And we talked to her about this endlessly, and we were right there with her, and we journeyed on with this question for her. We tried to do everything we could to bring new perspectives to the question, give new, books for her to read, give her, whatever we could bring into it to kind of do it, because we knew this was like her Achilles heel. And sure enough, one tumor showed up right in the back of the head, which is the back side of this vortex of the sixth chakra. So is that all exactly how I just laid it out? Is that why the tumor's there? I don't have anything but the evidence that we have in the biophysics to outline that story to you. So I may be inaccurate in that, but I can tell you that all the pieces were there just as spoken of. We have very objective, repeated measures showing that vulnerability, and sure enough, a tumor shows up there. And we tackled it not only with all the tools that had been deployed to put her into remission the first time, many more tools that were more advanced, more complicated. She went through multiple surgeries, all of the tools at hand, and we couldn't get that space to heal enough to get that one last tumor to disappear. And so despite 4 huge tumors that were life-threatening disappearing, and probably many micromets that we couldn't see in the abdomen, we couldn't get that last piece to heal because the environment, the energy field, due to the emotional structures that had been placed in her, the stress, fear, guilt around her religious worldview, became such a vulnerability to her that we were unable to overcome that. And her journey was beautiful in the end. Her journey of her last month, extraordinarily, she journaled for the last month. She lived full time in a little apartment next to our clinic so that she could access all of the care as we moved into the hospice stage of her care and everything else. And her parents moved in with her for the last day, and her father literally laid in bed with her. By this time, she was in a coma. She went into a coma about 36 hours before she died. And so she was just kind of laying in bed on her back in a coma state. Respirations were irregular. Her father laid out next to her, eyes closed, as if he was in a coffin, his hands folded across his chest, and he didn't move for a day and a half. He didn't drink, he didn't pee, he just laid there next to his daughter. Gosh. And really became present with her for the first time in his life, I think, and fully entered into her journey in those last day and a half. Was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed as a human being, let alone a doctor. And she had journaled for the last year and a half or month and a half, a new journal. And in a very dramatic moment, she passed away, where she suddenly screamed into the world. She sat straight up in bed, screamed through us, like as if she was looking and seeing something past us, screamed and let go of her spirit. And she kind of died as she settled back into bed and let go of her spirit there. As we all kind of mourned that, we were crying. It was a very, incredibly terrifying and beautiful moment of this passage of this young woman. Despite the amount of grief her parents were feeling, her dad was almost in this elated state. And then he said, "I got to read this to you. I have to read this to you." And he ran in another room, grabbed this journal that I had been unaware of, and read the last 10 pages of this thing. And this woman in her last month and a half, even in the last, 5 days of her life, came to realize that she was cared for and loved by an entity that she came to be comfortable calling God. And she realized that there was peace there, and she completed her journey. I think she was born into this world, and she completed her journey over this one question: is there God in man? Is there a benevolent love and source of life that pours through us as human beings? And her journal needs to become a published book someday, because it's one of the most eloquent, beautiful journeys that's ever expressed that realization as she faced her mortality. And it's extraordinary to witness.
Gosh, so it's still sad, sad story. A few questions are coming through on Facebook, so we'll ask those. One viewer asked, is it possible that the immune system is lowered due to a lack of B vitamins when stressed? And if it is, then would taking extra B vitamins help when you are having negative thoughts?
So I certainly can't tell you that that's a yes or no answer.
Okay.
There's many reasons for major depression, anxiety disorder, mood instability. There's many pathways to that journey. Certainly, nutritional deficiencies are common. In that, we know that major depression doesn't happen independent of the microbiome. That's been a lot of our work over the last 6 years, is to understand the relationship between the human microbiome, the genomics of the human being, protein matrix that is made from the human nucleus, the care of the extracellular matrix, the care of the neurologic system, the care of the neurotransmitters that would be the fuel for that neurologic system. All of this has its underpinnings in the microbiome. The microbiome, of course, is the bacteria, the fungi, the parasites, the viruses that live in, on, and around us. And that reality of this microbiome necessarily being present is new news. We now know that one course of antibiotics can increase your risk of anxiety attack by 17% in the next year, 24% increase in major depression within the next year with one course of antibiotics. If you have 2 courses of antibiotics, those numbers jump radically. It can push you up to like a 45% likelihood of having major depression in a year with 2 courses of antibiotics in a 6 to 12 month period. So if we kill the microbiome, mood disorder occurs. And so that's the present state of the world, is that we've destroyed the ecosystem thoroughly. We've wiped out at least 40% of the biodiversity on the earth in the last 50 years through chemical farming, chemical introduction into our food chain, preservatives and all the weird chemicals that work its way into prepared foods these days, processed foods, all of these things disrupting the microbiome. And then, of course, just gross disruption of the microbiome of the soils through our farming practices, through our urban sprawl, through paving the world, through putting concrete over everything. All of these things have destroyed the ecosystem at such grandeur. To lose to the point of extinction 40% of the biologic life in the world that's developed over millions and millions of years, to lose that in a mere 50 years is a travesty and a sadness that should be in our hearts and minds. That's beyond recognition and comprehension. The sadness shouldn't be there to create pathology. The sadness should be there to create the opportunity for transformation. And so that's where our companies are coming in strong. My parent company is Seraphic Group, and we're channeling all of the money that we make from all of our products and technologies on the market right back into our parent company to reinvest on research and development of disruptive technologies that can get at the root cause of why is our social and technological structure so destructive? Why do we suck life out of everything we touch as human beings? Why don't we participate in a circle of life? What is it about us as a species that has this tendency to wipe out 90% of the large animal life in any ecosystem that we enter into? We just are so abusive. We're so destructive. We're so
well, the answer is we're self-centered. That's what we are. We think about self.
Yeah, and I hope that the science of our lab and today, today's discussion and so many others that I have on all these podcasts, I hope it's part of that discussion right there, which is if we can come to terms that human life can't survive without the microbiome, let alone the other species that we see around us, then we should realize that in our narcissism, we have to take care of the rest of the planet. And so if we want to survive as a species, we have to immediately change. 1 in 3 males in the U.S. is now thought to be infertile. 1 in 4 women have infertility. And so we're losing the ability to procreate as a species because we've so destroyed the ecosystem and the fabric from which health springs. And so this narcissistic journey of destroying everything has got us to the point where we're destroying ourselves very quickly now. And we're kind of on the brink. If we don't change direction in the next 50 years, it's very likely we'll be extinct and join that mass extinction that's been going on the planet by our own hands for the last 40 years. And our extinction will be at our own hands as well. It's not going to be, some catastrophic, war. It's not going to be some catastrophic volcanic event or a meteor. We're going to do it by our own hands if we don't change our own direction. We're going to poison ourselves into extinction. We're going to destroy ourselves. And that can either, stay that way and we go extinct, and we shouldn't necessarily feel that much emotional burden for that. I mean, if that's probably the best thing from an empiric state. The most important thing for planet Earth right now is that humans disappear. That's the only way that Earth is going to recover and have life on it. And so it should be our number one goal would be self-extinction if we cared for the planet enough. Or the obvious alternative is change everything. Change the way we interact with nature, reconnect to nature in every shape and form. Our cell phone communication networks need to work within biological realms that are actually beneficial, not harmful. And that's possible. When you know about the frequency resonance of everything that's in the universe or everything that's on Earth, it's not hard to pick frequency resonance structures that are not damaging. Right now, we have damaging Wi-Fi. We have damaging, frequency resonance that's right in the biologic realm of cellular structure, and we're screwing it up. And so we have enough knowledge already to change everything from our technology to the products we buy, to the way in which we farm, to the way in which we produce food adequate for 7 billion people. We have all the technologies and know-how to do all of that in a natural, regenerative way rather than a consumptive pathway. And so let's go extinct and not be sorry for that extinction, or let's change everything so that we can continue to be a positive participant in Mother Nature and life on this planet.
I agree with you 100% on that, Zach, 100%. It just infuriates me when I see there's little things like someone dropping something on the ground. I think, well, this is really their view on Earth. Earth is providing for them, and this is their thanks. They're not making anything better. They're just making things worse.
You're right. That tiny little decision to litter, to drop your trash on the side of the road. It's the tiny decision to grab a plastic straw versus no straw. It's the tiny decision to, eliminate plastic bags from your community or continue to use plastic bags. These are the things that are so fundamental in our impact on the planet. I mean, it's so obvious. The idea of getting an electric car just so that we move our transportation industry forward from its codependent relationship with fossil fuel. So get an electric car, and then people say, well, electric cars aren't that great. I don't care if they're not that great. They're a hell of a lot better than what we've been doing for the last 50 years to the planet. And so let's move forward. Let's not look at it as the penultimate solution. Let's look at it as a step in the right direction. So freaking get an electric car and then take the next step, which is going to be a car that runs on salt water. And we're going to make biologic engines. It's going to happen. And we need to, as consumers, push the timeline on that to something that's going to be in enough time to allow us to stop damaging the planet so fast.
I ride around on an electric motorcycle. Actually, there's a very interesting question that's come in. Zach, if you're sick and you've got negative emotions inside you, if you can clear them, if you can resolve them, overcome them, and clear your body from all these negative thoughts, would that make a physical change in your body? Like you've given 2 examples now with this woman. I mean,
100%. It's so dramatic. If you can clear the emotional trauma from your life with complete forgiveness of your guilt, complete elimination of the fear. And by the way, guilt is forgiveness. The elimination of fear comes through surrender, which is not as obvious. At least that's my take on it. That surrender is the opposite of fear.
Yes.
Fear comes from the belief that we can control the situation. Surrender comes in is an embracing of the realization that we have to surrender ourselves to a greater intelligence, to a greater existence of love, to a greater reality of love at the fabric level, to accept the miracles that we can be given in the day. The speed at which I've seen that change the trajectory of people's lives is just what we've talked about previously. It's literally seconds or minutes that you are changing human biology and function.
Mm.
And this is why hypnosis works, right? And so in hypnosis, you can see somebody who's been addicted to cigarettes for 50 years, and they go through a couple sessions of hypnosis, and they're not at all addicted to cigarettes. In fact, they are repulsed by those cigarettes. They can't stand the smell of them. I mean, that person had an incredible neurologic shift. The complexity of that change, don't have time to even describe. It'd take me an hour to tell you just the neurologic changes that would have to happen to break an addiction to cigarettes. And yet that can happen in a split second in a hypnotic state where you're not even in your conscious mind. And so the speed at which change happens is radical, and it speaks to the concept of grace. The fact that we can disease our bodies over decades of self-abuse and loathing and self destruction through our emotions, as well as our chemical environment and everything else we do to ourselves, that can all be released and reversed in seconds, minutes, months. That's an extraordinary reality of grace. And so at the fabric level, humanity is founded on grace. Life is founded on grace. We will be given grace that outmeasures anything that we would deserve. It's literally a gift all the time.
Gosh. Now, I've got a question from Prashant. Prashant, I won't go into the details of what you've, the background of your question, but what Prashant is wanting to know is, how can one overcome deep sadness and anxiety so that they can move on and improve their life? Prashant, yes. He found himself through no fault of his own, someone else in a bad situation, and so he's becoming overwhelmed at the moment with his situation. Are there any techniques that he can use?
For sure. And there's many routes to healing your situation. And I think it's not every single one of us, if we are honest with ourselves, have done things, said things to those that we love, or hurt people in our environment unintentionally or subconsciously or sometimes intentionally. And the guilt and sorrow that can come from a situation like that is intense. The pathway out of that, I think, again and again, is going to be the ability for you to come into the present moment, to be able to lice yourself from any perceived future and lice yourself from any perceived past, and come right present to this second that we're in right now. Because in the reality, at the atomic physics level, that's all that exists, is this split second. And it is a split second. It's down to probably 1/millionth of a second that we've already been able to measure. That reality only exists in a millionth of a second. And then there's a next millionth of a second, and there's a next millionth of a second. But those things are not tied together unless we choose to continue to believe in and create the same environment for that time. You can change that in a millionth of a second, create a new reality yourself, if you can learn to become disciplined enough to become right now. Because right now is all the grace, forgiveness, and love that's ever existed. The reason I know that is, again, because of the atomic physics. Nothing can be destroyed. Energy is not destroyable. It is impermeable. It is perfect. It is continuous. Energy at this atomic level never ceases to exist. You can't destroy an electron. It reorganizes. That energy will reorganize. Protons, you can blow them apart in a collider. All that energy will recollect. Energy is continuous all the time. So whatever you feel like you've lost or you've damaged or you've done in the past, all of that is already reorganized into something else. The reason why it continues to haunt our minds and biologies is because we continue to hold the belief that it's still present. And so sorrow, anxiety, all of these symptoms that you're asking about, these are perceptions of the past and a re-imprinting of those on the present moment. So learn how to meditate. Learn how to meditate. Come in.
I was talking about that just before the show. So
yeah.
No, well, while I was filling in the time, I was just telling people, the few people that were on at that time, that I started my transcendental meditation. I've done it for about a month and a half now. And I found it great because it's in the moment. You don't have to focus on anything. It's super easy. Just let yourself be repeat a word that has no meaning, so you can clear your mind from all the distractions. And then you sort of dive down and come back up to the surface. It's a great form of meditation where I haven't done meditation before, but I've tried to do other ones and it's been no good. But the meditation seems to bring some day-to-day life things and more clarity. And what you're saying now is true. What things seem continuous because you're allowing them to chain together. But if you break the chain and then you take the next moment as a new moment, then you no longer have the legacy of the past and these feelings of guilt, anxiety, fear. You can overcome that. So it's a coincidence.
It's perfect. I mean, that's such a good review, and that's why transcendental meditation, it's why meditation in any form has been taught for literally thousands of years, is because it's so potent. It's such a powerful way to stop the cycle. Our negative thoughts about ourselves are so cyclical, and yet there's nothing that can't break that in a split second. You can break those cycles of self-abuse and self-emotional undermining in a split second if you can become present enough to find out that you're fully loved, fully forgiven, fully present. You are made of the fabric of love. You are made of the resonance of love. You are made of the fabric of the entire universe. There's nothing you can do to separate yourself from that, but you can die in the body prematurely. And the stress that we create as human beings is doing that, both to ourselves as well as the animals and all of the other biology on Earth is suffering right now and disappearing before its time because of the level of dissidence and chaos that we've put into the energy field here on planet Earth. And so, Deepak Chopra and Oprah Winfrey, they've joined together. They have a mission of getting 1 billion people to meditate. And if we could hit 1 billion people meditating on this planet, 1 in every 7, I have no question that not only are individuals going to heal, but nations will heal, societies will heal, cultures will heal. If 1 billion will meditate, we will move forward. And, between now and then, every 1,000 that meditate, every single one that meditates is creating a vortex, is creating a new opportunity for change and transition for our species. So if you're already a meditator, my sincerest gratitude to you. You're helping me, you're helping the planet, you're helping us all move forward. And meditation comes in many forms. You may not even realize you're a meditator. Many people will, that come to my clinic and I mention meditation, they're like, oh, I've always meant to do that, but I never do that. But as soon as I start to ask them about what their daily life looks like, they say, well, I start the morning every morning by walking out in my garden and just sitting there and enjoying the sunlight on the back of my head and drinking my tea. That's the most beautiful freaking meditation I've ever heard of. You don't have to go sit in a room on a pillow that has gold fringe on it to go have a meditative experience. You need to freaking get present. And there's nothing more beautiful. There's no sanctuary built more divinely than the nature around us. And so don't wait to get to some magnificent, mosaic building to have your meditative experience. Simply go outside. To the gentleman who was asking, how do you move past sorrow and anxiety? I recommend you go out and pick a leaf and stare at that leaf for 10 minutes. And it has to be 10 minutes. Don't break your gaze on that leaf for 10 minutes, and you will have a deep meditative experience and reconnection with the nature around you in that process. Just silence.
Simple. Something so
powerful that is. Just a second of it. So powerful.
Yeah.
Can you feel that weight that happens when we just go silent for a second? That's gravity right there. That is the electromagnetic field waking up, becoming present. It's beautiful.
It is. Another question's come in to break the silence. This is from Laurie Parker. Laurie asks, have you used the Biofield Toning? I've got no idea what it is, so do you know what it is?
We have not used that specific one in clinic. I'm aware of it, and we've probably compared dozens of different approaches to the electromagnetic field, everything from flower essences onto a lot of scalar wave treatment that we do in clinic, acupuncture, emotion code therapy, NEAT, all these different mechanisms of changing the energetic field, color puncture. We've checked many vast techniques, and they all work. They all change it, and that's the same story as and you need to be cautious of this, because there's so many marketing teams out there in the alternative integrated medicine world right now trying to convince everybody that they've got the best and greatest tool, and they put a great snazzy marketing scheme around that, and then in the end, is it really new? And the answer is no. It's just a tool, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It might be a fantastic tool, but it's being used wrong if it's manipulative. And so be cautious of the marketing teams, and know that they probably all work, especially when used with the right intention, with the right practitioner who has the right intention, and a individual or patient who comes into that space with the right intention for themselves. The tool becomes almost irrelevant, and then it's the two human beings that are interacting at that moment. And it's our ability to heal one another that really comes through. And I believe that about my clinic all the time. When I see somebody healed, I know that had a lot to do with my relationship with that person, not the supplements or technologies that we use in clinic. Those are all just tools in the toolbox to get us to a point where we trust each other high enough to be cured. That's amazing.
Dree Calendar has asked the question, would Dianetics be a reasonable way of clearing chains of events, or is meditation better?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first word.
Dianetics. Would Dianetics? I haven't heard of that one either. A way of cleaning. My accent might be throwing you as well. Dianetics. Dianetics.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, but we'll pass on that one.
Same thing, applies. Not even knowing the technology, I can tell you that if you have a well-intentioned, grounded therapist who's present with you in this moment, and you become present with that practitioner on the other side of that tool, it's going to work.
It's amazing. So, what other case studies have you seen with your clinic with people that come in with emotional baggage? If you can see the baggage is with this person, the baggage belongs to the person. What would you suggest to them? Would you suggest they do meditation? Would you suggest that they go out and look at that leaf for 10 minutes? What do you generally do with the person?
Yeah, all of the above. All of the above. I would listen to the person, to listen to what they're being drawn to. And once you show them that there's a pathway away from the baggage, ask them what's resonating with them. And oftentimes they won't know, and they'll just want me to recommend something. And so I'll give them an option. And then as soon as they experience that, they either resonate with that individual on the other side of the tool, or they don't. And then they'll either stick with it, or I'll show them another pathway. I don't believe there's any one pathway, because ultimately it's about those two human beings coming into a place of trust. And some people just can't get over some mental block on acupuncture. So no matter how much acupuncture they do and how good the therapist is, they can't get it to work, because the individual's not willing to engage and trust in that tool and its capacity to be part of this healing journey. And so it's going to be different for each individual, but the faster that we let go of the belief that there is a technology or a thing, and realize it's a symphony. This is a symphony of tools that Mother Nature has given us. And if we can embrace that, we're going to realize that, my gosh, there's so much value in listening to a violin. But my gosh, the cello, when you hear the cello, it just makes you cry. And then, oh my gosh, have you heard the resonance in a bass string as a bow is pulled across it? Oh my gosh, did you hear that clarinet in that moment? It's like we keep arguing over, my tool's better, my instrument's better. Well, my God, if you guys would just back up, you'd find out you're playing a freaking symphony, and you can stop arguing and just celebrate the fact that it's beautiful music that's coming through us as human beings when we choose to be healers, when we choose to be healed. We create beautiful music in that moment.
That's right. We've covered all the topics we were supposed to cover except for one, leaky gut. That sneaked in.
I get so far off topic, we never cover anything we meant.
But they're always the best ones, Zach. But we did have as one of our draw cards leaky gut, and apparently, if someone's
that's That's in my wheelhouse. Okay, I can get you that. If you haven't heard me talk about leaky gut 5 million times before, we'll talk about it now. So leaky gut is a kind of a non-scientific term that's been put on the scientific term of intestinal permeability. The intestine is made of trillions of cells that are laced together, or billions at least, billions of cells that are laced together by tight junctions. These are like spot welds or Velcro that open and close to allow material to come across into the immune system and bloodstream and into the human being to nurture them. And so the gut lining is massive. It covers 2 tennis courts in surface area. It begins at your nasal sinuses and goes all through the intestinal system. That massive barrier system is your front line of defense. It really is the thing that defines the outside world to your body. In that way, it is the molecular self-identity. And so your molecular self-identity relies on the intelligence or the coherence of these Velcro-like proteins that hold all those cells into a single barrier system. And the incredible thing that we have happening in humanity and in our animals that would eat from our same food chain, both our pets and our agricultural animals, are suffering massively right now because the chemicals that are commonly placed in those things, the herbicides and the pesticides that kill the microbiome, damage the tight junctions. And glyphosate or Roundup, which is the most ubiquitous chemical on the planet right now, and just we're very excited about this lawsuit that just got won in California with a cancer patient finally getting $200 million from Monsanto is very exciting for us because we've been part of this mission to kind of do this, awareness thing that this chemical that we're all eating and drinking is carcinogenic. And it's carcinogenic because it destroys that fabric of the human self-identity. And as you destroy the self-identity of the cell, it can then become a cancer cell. A cell that's lonely long enough will become a cancer cell. It will collect enough damage unrepaired in itself that its only option is to proliferate and become that tumor or cancer. Right. And so that leaky gut, leaky blood vessels, leaky blood-brain barrier, leaky kidney tubules that's developing because of our food and water system, that's really at the heart and soul of this. And we could go on for many hours on this topic, as I typically do, but that's the nutshell there. But it has an exact interplay with the emotional story that we've been telling, that if at the biologic level we are disrupting our sense of self-identity, then what's the likelihood that somebody's going to be able to do effective meditation? What's the likelihood that somebody's going to have the wherewithal to have a moment of silence, to come into peace today? What's the likelihood they're going to have the emotional reservoir to forgive themselves, to get over their guilt, to pass, let go of their fear and baggage? The fact is we have chemicalized this planet to the point where it's undermining our ability to rise in consciousness. And yet I see humanity fighting against that. I see humanity rising in our consciousness despite our politics, despite the chemical warfare, despite all of this stuff. I'm watching a documentary the last few nights on the Vietnam War, and it's dumbfounding. The idiocy of the politics of the situation is dumbfounding. The brutality and the inhumane practices that were carried out on a people group. It's dumbfounding that we sent innocent young kids of our own children into warfare that we already knew wasn't working. We knew it would never work, and yet we kept doing it. And so that we can do that to our own children says something about the vulnerability that we have as humans. We can become so narcissistic, so caught up in our egos and our desire to be reelected or to take more, to make these catastrophic decisions.
Yeah.
And so all of this in the end is the same story. It is one of self-identity as a species and a realization that we can't survive alone. We die. We develop major depression and anxiety if we kill the microbiome. We develop leak and inflammation after that microbiome is damaged. And so we develop chronic disease. Currently, our children have 46% of our children have a chronic disease diagnosis in the United States. 46% of our children have a chronic disease diagnosis. That's compared to 4% of the entire population of the United States with a chronic disease in the 1960s. And so we have so much disease burden on our children today. And all of the little decisions we have to drive our cars, to eat chemical foods, to pollute our water system and air systems, all of those decisions are leading to the demise of our own children. We no longer have to send them to war for them to suffer and die in fear and isolation. Fear and isolation is now a cellular event that happens on a daily basis because of our chemical farming.
I like to end these sermons on a positive note, Zach, and I'm sort of struggling here.
I'm so sorry. I can bring us back to a positive note. I can bring us there because, again, it comes back to the story of grace. We have made grave, grave mistakes as human beings. We have made massive technological mistakes. We've made massive, religious mistakes. We've made massive, abusive errors on so many levels. And we can have great sense of sorrow, and we can have a great sense of guilt, or we can all come right present right now and leave all of that baggage behind. For a split second, if humanity will join together and just say we're going to come present right now into the reality that we are made from the fabric of love, we are living in a fabric of reality that is more graceful than it is damaged. We can, in a split second, let go of our collective emotional trauma and baggage and become completely free of that chaos at our fabric level. We can come into a space where we can heal so fast that it will defy the understanding of the media, the understanding of our politicians, when suddenly humanity stands up together and says, I love you. I love myself. Let's do this thing. Let's do this life, and let's not cling to it and fight for it and suck life out of everything in the battle for more life. Let's realize that life is a gift. It comes to us freely. It flows through us every day that we're given breath. Let's accept the gift. Let's thrive in it. Let's express our love and respect for one another. And let's enjoy what would come from that. We've never seen it in human history. We've been locked in a story of war, collapse, rape of nations and individuals and everything else. That pattern has existed since the beginning of civilization. And now we have the opportunity to break it because we can become right now for a moment and leave all the baggage behind.
Beautiful words, everybody. Dr. Zach Bush. Zach, thank you so much. And thank you for the positive note too at the end. I really hope it happens. Your vision is a beautiful vision. I can see this happening. We've got enough people to make it happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being part of the mouthpiece and the communication chain to make all this happen. It wouldn't happen if I was just sitting in a room alone. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your experience as well as your audience's experience. For all of you listening and who will listen in the future, thank you for becoming present with us for a moment here, and thank you for letting that change your life and changing our lives in the mix of that. So it's been an honor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.